Which of these alternative groups of lovable outcast weirdos remind you most of the marvelous X-Men? Welcome back, Nerd Squad. It is me, Amanda. Join me as we count down these top 10 teams that definitely seem to have been heavily inspired by our favorite uncanny mutants. Number 10. Cyberforce. Cyberforce has to be one of the biggest ripoffs of the X-Men that I've ever seen. They also are likely inspired by X-Force though, based on their team dynamic and their team name, so a little bit of like an X-Men X-Force. I would say both of those things kind of come together here. Cyberforce was a group of mutants who also ended up captured by cyber data. Almost all, if not literally all of the team members, bear extremely strong resemblances to the X-Men mutants, which contributed to the series getting some serious flack in terms of it being kind of a copycat of Marvel's X-Men. However, it did differ in regards to some key elements. While X-Men was more targeted towards being family friendly, as many of Marvel's comics generally have been throughout the years, well except for maybe lines like Max and to an extent I would say Ultimate, Cyberforce did not shy away from pushing the boundaries of, let's say, teen related content, and this also got them some flack among certain circles when it came to critiques of the series and the team as well. Cyberforce is a team and series that originated at Image Comics in partnership with Malibu Comics. The team was created by Mark Silvestri and would eventually move over to Top Cow Productions, which is actually his own publisher, so yeah, Cyberforce. And friends, if you love what we do here on Top 10 Nerd and you love when we talk about things that are mutant adjacent, mutant related, or just mutants in general, be sure to let us know by clicking that subscribe button. Number 9. Ripclaw. I wonder who that could be a ripoff of. If you guessed another very famous Marvel superhero mutant with claws that is known by the code name of Wolverine, you'd be right, bub. Ripclaw was one of the few members of the team to actually withstand the test of time, being one of the most famous and long-lasting even after Cyberforce began to fade. Despite his team losing prominence, Ripclaw would end up continuing to guest star, showing up in other series like Silvestri's The Darkness. He's also had his own short solo series as well for a bit. Ripclaw differs from Wolverine slightly in the fact that he has ties to the native peoples of America, with it being believed he may belong originally to the Apache tribe, although he also seems to have ties to the Navajo, the Lakota Sioux, and the Cheyenne as well. Like Wolverine, he also has experience and a background in the martial arts as well. Ripclaw possesses cybernetic claw enhancements that are similar to Marvel's Deathstrike. They're actually claws that are part of his fingernails, allowing his fingernails to extend and become razor sharp. In addition to that, he also has superhuman senses, strength, and a healing factor. Number 8. WildC.A.T.S. WildC.A.T.S is a team created by Jim Lee and Brandon Choi for Image Comics, during a period when many creators were actually working with Image because they sought to own their own properties and ideas, which the big two were pretty opposed to at that time, and I mean, honestly still are today. WildC.A.T.S actually became so popular that despite the fact that DC did not want to let creators like Jim Lee own their creations and believed that it was actually the brand and staple characters that sold comics, not the creators behind said characters and narratives, they would later approach Lee to offer a sum for ownership of the WildC.A.T.S and his Wildstorm universe, so that DC could take over the publishing of both. Wow. When it comes to this team, it's easy to see the influence of Marvel's X-Men, just even when we look at its creator, Jim Lee's history. Lee is also known for his amazing art, and despite being now heavily integrated with DC Comics, is also no stranger to Marvel, having been one of the people behind one of the most famous and iconic runs, the 90s X-Men run, which featured art by Jim Lee throughout. In WildC.A.T.S, we follow a team of superpowered beings, known as half-breeds, who are the result of aliens coming to Earth known as the Cherubim and mating with humans. The conflict of the comic pits the Cherubim and their offspring against the Daemonites, another alien race they have been warring with for centuries. Number 7. Grifter. Cole Cash has some distinct differences, but also a lot of distinct similarities, I would say, at the same time, to another very famous and prominent X-Man that you are likely familiar with. Gambit. Grifter is Cole Cash, a literal grifter in terms of his backstory and origin from a young age. Not only does he have a history as a con man, but while having a shady past, he also appears to genuinely want to save and help people he deems innocent. Sort of like a thief with a heart of gold. Sound like, Anyone you already know? Grifter has had psionic powers in the past, but is also known for his skills as a marksman, generally wielding 2 guns or using throwing weapons in combat. So yeah, he might not have the exact power set of Gambit, he doesn't like throw cards and they explode, but the whole, you know, throwing things element of his abilities definitely seems to fit the bill otherwise. And I mean, I feel like even his look is very Gambit-esque. Number 6. Umbrella Academy. The Umbrella Academy was definitely influenced and inspired by other similar teams that came before, like the X-Men, there's no doubt there. But there are also elements of Hellboy in there as well, which is pretty cool, especially with how oddball the comic series, its characters, and the show inspired by the comics can be. Umbrella Academy and its creation, however, was also influenced by Gerard Way's experience with the band My Chemical Romance, and his time on tour. For those of you that don't know, Gerard Way is the person that created the Umbrella Academy, so fun facts. In fact, many of the Hargreeves are actually inspired by his bandmates themselves, who of course quickly become like your family when you spend so much time together with them and, you know, especially when you're on tour. The Umbrella Academy is the story of a group of superpowered individuals who were adopted by Sir Reginald Hargreeves after their mysterious births, which all happened on the same day all over the world. Reginald recruited them to create his own superhero team, raising them and training them to hone their skills and master them over time. However, his plan was only met with, I would say, a modicum of success, and eventually the Umbrella Academy would disband. However, years later they would come together again after the possibly mysterious death of their adoptive father, and would be forced to reunite in order to prevent the end of the world. Number 5. Allison Hargreeves. Allison Hargreeves is maybe one of the most original feeling rip-offs that I've listed here in terms of, you know, individual characters we're talking about, but still, she does seem to take a lot of inspiration from one very prominent X-Men character, Jean Grey. As a child, I would say Allison especially resembles Jean in the comics, with her hair appearing red as opposed to her standard purple that we're used to seeing her have when she's an adult. And with purple hair, you could use that to link her to another famous telepathic or psionic character, Psylocke, aka Betsy Braddock, and also aka Quanon, depending on what we're talking about, and even if they're combined, that's a whole thing. Sometimes separate, sometimes tragically combined, I would say. Allison Hargreeves is known by the codename of Rumor. This is because she can use her powers to influence the will of others by using the phrase, "I heard a rumor." While Jean and Psylocke don't typically use their powers in this way, Jean is definitely capable of controlling people and influencing them in their minds using her own abilities, and I would also say so is Psylocke to a perhaps a lesser extent, but still is a thing that she could do. Although her psionic abilities tend to be more used in direct combat, where she can deal mental damage using psi weapons, because that's what Psylocke likes to do. Number 4. Next Men. The Next Men definitely were inspired by the X-Men. There's no doubt about that in my mind at all. They were a creation of John Byrne for Dark Horse Comics, and of course John Byrne is also a writer who has a history of, you know, being tied to the X-Men as well. These superpowered beings were more anti-heroes than straight up heroes who attempt to rescue a world that they really don't know a lot about, having been raised in a virtual reality world inside a lab. In other words, they kind of, to me, share some similarities to our friend Phantom X. The Next Men also have some other interesting elements when it comes to how they were presented in contrast to the X-Men. Byrne tried to ground them and their abilities a little bit more in reality by making pretty much every superpower that they have come with some kind of quirk or some kind of setback in some way, trying to acknowledge some of the real world consequences one might actually have to deal with physically or mentally as a result of having superpowers. Because, you know, usually when you have superpowers, it's like you have super strength and like it's not a problem for your body, but then there are other characters that have super strength in other worlds where it's like, okay, they're super strong, but they're not super durable, which seems like how powers would probably go, and then you just mess yourself up by using your super strength. Number 3. Nathan. Nathan of the Next Men is definitely a ripoff of Cyclops, but something that I think is actually really interesting is he isn't a direct one-for-one copy. His powers are actually, in a way, kind of like the opposite of Scott's, or at least an alternative, if not, you know, the direct opposite to Scott's powers. They're not really the direct opposite, but they work in a very different way, but something that kind of feels like the opposite. Let me explain. While Nathan can also be spotted wearing shades with even a similar hairstyle, I'd say to Scott's, his powers allow him to see everything extremely well. Instead of expelling optic blasts from his eyes are more like great receptors for light, meaning that he can see things most people can't. Nathan, like Scott though, is also known for being the team leader of the Next Men, so yeah, they definitely are meant to be kind of like parallels of each other, but I do like that Byrne decided to give us a very different kind of like eye related mutation here. Also, this power set kind of makes me think of iBoy, who I don't think was created yet when X-Men first appeared. I'm pretty sure they appeared in like the 90s or the 80s. You know, iBoy didn't come out until the 2000s, so it is possible that Nathan, who was definitely inspired by Psych, may have also influenced the creation of other X-Men like iBoy, who appeared over at Marvel after Nathan's first appearance in X-Men over at Dark Horse, which is pretty neat actually. Number 2, G-Men. Before we even get X-Men in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we're probably likely going to get X-Men copycats in the streaming series universe based off of Garth Ennis's The Boys. The G-Men are a villainous team inspired by the X-Men, who are another group of kind of Vought endorsed heroes. At least I think they're Vought endorsed. I haven't read all of The Boys, so I apologize if I'm incorrect about that one. And unsurprisingly, it's also believed that they'll be linked to Payback when they arrive in the live action series of its own universe. Payback, for those who may not be aware, are basically The Boys' version of Marvel's Avengers in the comics, with their leader being a parody-inspired version of Captain America there, known as Soldier Boy, although they kind of went a different way with it a little bit in the live action series. G-Men are led by John Gogolkin, whose team were all kidnapped when they were younger and raised and trained by him in his own school. The name G-Men likely comes from his last name, Gogolkin, but can also be a slang term used with negative connotation to indicate those working for the government. G-Men, government men. You know? So that name kind of has a double meaning, and also it just basically means, yeah, they're not very good people. Surprise, surprise. Number 1, John Gogolkin. If you thought Professor X was bad, wait till you meet his boys equivalent, which of course is way worse. The founder of the G-Men and its other spin-off teams is John Gogolkin. In The Boys, Gogolkin has done a lot of awful things to his superpowered students. Many of them I cannot even mention on YouTube because they're just that bad and kind of goes against TOS. Unlike Charles Xavier though, Gogolkin has no powers to speak of, being more similar to Niles Calder, I would say, from DC in that regard, who is in essence the head of their version of an off-kilter outcast hero team known as the Doom Patrol. Doom Patrol, in fact, is not a ripoff of the X-Men, if you're wondering why I didn't list them here, as their existence actually predates the X-Men by a few months in terms of the comic's release. Gogolkin ended up capturing his team members as opposed to offering them a place at his school, taking them kinda against their will. He specifically, however, seeks out runaways and orphans, which, to be honest, so kind of does Charles. So, although some of Xavier's students do admittedly come from happy, healthy families that simply basically chose to admit their children to his school to be trained in the use of their powers. So I would say, you know, that could be a difference. What makes something a knockoff anyways in your book? Let us know in the comments. We'll see you next time, but until then, you stay nerdy, YouTube. Bye!